life is a process of learning and unlearning.
A life-changing friendship.
Leading to a newfound faith.
There was this line of like, Islam is for Muslims. And so being able to realize like, no, like this is also for me.
This is Nateem Manelli.
A passionate lawyer and a proud convert to Islam.
It is these quiet moments of certainty that have the longest impact in your life, if you can listen to them.
Welcome to the Journey Towers podcast with your hosts, Hadi and Alya Matkur.
So a lot of people actually think that I changed my name when I converted to Islam, because Nateema doesn't necessarily match the color of my skin, but actually it's because my dad's a big nerd, capital N. So I was named after a character from Star Trek, The Next Generation, I believe. I'm not too sure, I have not watched the series, but that's where the name came from. I was born and raised here in the Bay Area, Santa Cruz specifically, and right now I'm an attorney, so I work in family law, which is very exciting for me because it's something I was really interested in throughout my time in law school. But I went to undergrad in Arizona, which is where I met the very first hijabi that I've ever known in my life. And obviously that played into part of my decision to, not part of my decision. That is what first keyed me into the fact that there was this entire community, culture, religion that up until that point in my life I hadn't, known about beyond what I saw in the news. And I've also spent some time on the East Coast when I was in law school.
Nice. So could you talk a bit about how you grew up, your upbringing and stuff, and you grew up as a Christian or as spiritual, or what did you grow up as?
Yeah. So I actually did not grow up with any type of organized religion in my life at all, which might surprise some people. So my mom is born and raised in Mexican. She's an immigrant here to the United States, but she didn't grow up Catholic. And so those types of religious practices didn't come into our life. And if you ask my dad what his religious beliefs are, he would self-identify as a pagan, actually. But I would say that despite not having, Catholicism or Christianity in my life growing up, a lot of Mexican culture is still rooted in a lot of culturally spiritual practices. And so I had a lot of that growing up. So I never necessarily, I always knew there were spirits. So I always knew there was something beyond the physical world that we experience and deal with. But it took me many, many years to ever take a step past my childhood understanding of the world.
Right on. Very cool. So you mentioned you converted to the Shia Islam in 2017, correct? Mm-hmm. So as you met the hijabi, your friend, right? And then after that, what did you do? How did you discover Islam more deeper than just a hijabi friend? Were you reading books? How did you take that step?
I'm 28 now, right? And I converted to Shia Islam in 2017, so that's 5 years ago. And I had been looking into, I would say, I can never fairly say that I was studying Islam. I think that there are many other people who have studied Islam and are, mashallah, very learned about the subject. But I was looking into it. And that process took me probably at least 3 years. And then if I look back on my life in its entirety, there were many other little moments that, nudged me one way or the other. And looking back on it ultimately nudged me to Islam. In terms of these more concrete moments, right? So after meeting my friend Lena, the first hijabi I'd ever met in my life, I really just wanted to be a good friend. And at that point in my life, I think, or at that point in life and time in history, Muslims were, a minority that was in the news a lot and was receiving a lot of heat. And I remember I went to an event where I think an imam was speaking, and he said, the news can't call Barack Obama the N-word on prime time, but they can call him a Muslim, right? And so to me at that point, it was important to be a good friend, but it was also just important to be an ally to a marginalized community. So as I mentioned, right, my mom was an immigrant to this country. Both of my parents have physical disabilities. And so growing up, I'd always had the opportunity to see the way that there are many injustices in many different areas of the world. And I didn't want to contribute to that, right? And so I wanted to make sure that I educated myself on these things. And it honestly started with, like, I think I was complimenting my friend, and she said, no, you have to say mashallah. And I was like, okay, I can do that, sure, right? And then I just realized, like, there's this whole other, like, community culture set of rules that if I want to be that good friend, that I need to educate myself on, right? And so honestly, it just started, like, I think she was a part of the MSA, because, like, what Muslim student isn't a part of the MSA? Yeah, the Muslim Student Association. And so I just started going to their events and things like that. And that's kind of how I, like, started getting into it, I guess.
That's interesting. So you must have faced some challenges when obviously you were converting to Islam, because you grew up in a completely different whole bunch, all your friends, I mean, not all your friends, but almost all your friends, your parents, everything like that. What were some challenges that you faced?
I think the biggest challenge for me was just this, this lifelong held belief that I was not a religious person, and I would never be a religious person, and I could never be a religious person. And so that, I think that was the biggest challenge that I had to overcome. And that's, I met my friend Lena in, like, 2015, I want to say. And so it was at least a 2-year process before I took my shahada. And throughout that time, obviously I made more Muslim friends, and we had more conversations about Islam, and we had more conversations about, like, God and the world and all those fun things. And something that would come up a lot was, like, are Natima, like, are you ever going to convert? And it's like, no, I would never. Sorry, guys, it's, like, really cool, and, like, I vibe with it, but, like, I would never convert. And actually, the conversation that was, like, the tipping point to me actually, like, taking my shahada was, I was sitting across from my best friend at dinner, and I had this whole list of, like, what I was going to do coming into Ramadan, right? Like, Ramadan was, like, a couple months away, and I had this, like, 3-page list of, like, Ammar Nakshwani lectures that I wanted to watch, and I was gonna fast during Ramadan just to see if I could do it. And, like, at that point in my life, I'd already cut out pork, I'd already cut out alcohol, like, things like that. And I was telling her, like, I just need to go through this so that, when I convert, that I'll know that, like, blah blah blah, that I can do it, or something like that. And so we're eating, and she, like, mid-bite goes, like, puts down a fork, and she's like, did you hear what you just said, though? And I was like, what? Like, you want me to go over the list one more time? Like, oh gosh. And she's like, no, you've always only ever said, like, if you convert, but tonight you said one, right? And so she was like, and so your heart has already made a decision, so why are you putting it off? And I was like, damn. And literally we finished our dinner, and then that night, like, I took my shahada. Wow. Yeah. I don't think I answered your question, actually, but that's that story.
Very cool. So I want to touch on a point of, like, as Muslims ourselves, right? So you mentioned that your friend was a big influence and, like, let's say, leading by example, right? So do you think it's, like, important as Muslims ourselves that we should, like, with our friends and with our community, try to lead by example? Yeah. Because I'll speak from my personal. So I have some friends at school that have been fasting, but they quit, like, 6 days in. Yeah. But they have interest, right? But it's sometimes, I think I can be a better example to them of what Islam really is, and akhlaq and stuff like that. So can you touch a little bit on that?
Yeah, definitely. And I wouldn't say it's not just leading by example, as important as that is, right? To make sure that we're living by our values. I think it's also just important to talk about these things, right? So in this friendship, my friend Anusha, I'm just going to shout her out. So she is the first Shia that I met, right? And so we became very, very close, mashallah. And we would just have these, like, long conversations, like, well, this is back when I was still in school, so I didn't have a bedtime, and, like, we would just stay up until, like, 3 a.m. and sometimes 6 a.m. and just have all these conversations, right? And mashallah, she was just very, like, approachable in how she spoke about these things. And when she was talking to me, she would just say, like, the universe, and like, you could tell in the way she spoke, it was like capital T, capital U. And it got to a point where it's like, I understood that when she said the universe, she was talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so I just got to a point where it's like, I know you're talking about God, you can just say God, like, that's fine. But it was those conversations that she was having with me, it was conversations that she was having with other friends, and that I was, just there to witness and overhear, that introduced me to Shia Islam, right? And so Islam in and of itself, I think when I was first introduced to Islam, it was from a Sunni perspective, and it was very intellectual. And so I connected with Islam on an intellectual level, but it wasn't until I was introduced to Shia Islam that I connected with Islam on an emotional level. And it was the combination of the both that ultimately led me to have the confidence to convert, revert, whatever the phrase is. But back to the point of the importance of talking about it, right? I remember there was a masjid that I went to in New Jersey, and we had a Q&A with someone or something like that, and the question was raised, like, you know, what do we say to our friends who like Google Shia Islam, and the first thing that comes up is like people doing matam and like da-da-da-da, and like the you know, the questions that will come from that and the negative assumptions that come from that. And I just remember, you know, sitting in the back row just thinking to myself, like, well, if you had talked to your friend first about what matam meant and like what Muharram means and like what's being recognized and what's being mourned during those weeks, it might not come as a surprise to them what they do find, right? People go to extreme lengths when they are grieving. So I just remember having like that thought of what have you already told your friends about your belief, about your practice, about your religion. And so I think as important as leading by example is, it's almost more valuable to just have that conversation with your friend of, you know, I'm Muslim, like this is what it means to me, this is what it would mean to someone else, and just being willing to have those conversations.
Yeah, that's interesting. So how did you approach your parents then with, you know, once you realized, how was that like?
Yeah. Okay, 2017. So I started law school in 2018, and I mentioned this because alhamdulillah, I actually got a full ride scholarship offer to law school. And so when I told my dad, I told him about the full ride scholarship offer to law school. And then I tacked in at the end and like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm Muslim now. And so he was just like, it's just really funny. He was like very happy, obviously, about the whole law school thing. And then I just like told him like, by the way, I'm Muslim now. And he just like had this moment where he like froze. And then he was like, okay, I respect that. And I was like, okay, thanks. So, you know, I like found my way to slip it in. My parents are divorced though, so it was a different conversation that I had with my dad versus my mom. So like I said, I took my shahada kind of out of nowhere, and then I came home and I got a tattoo to memorialize the moment, and I sent my family my family being my mom, my brother, and my sister, and I sent them the picture of that tattoo, and then I like FaceTimed them and I was like, yeah, so like I did it, I'm a Muslim now. And like that side of my family was more privy to like me looking into Islam, so it wasn't like quite a surprise to them, as it maybe was for my dad. But alhamdulillah, I think I'm very, very blessed that they might not understand it, but they've accepted it.
Right on. Very cool. That's good. So another thing is, so for anyone that's watching, for example, who is interested to learn about Islam, or, you know, on the edge of converting or reverting, something like that, what would you say to them? What was a piece of advice you could say?
I think what I would say is that Islam is for everyone, right? That moment for me where I had that emotional connection was that I was invited to a night of Muharram, and I was listening to the stories that they give after the lecture, and it just touched something deep inside, and I just started bawling my eyes out. But I wasn't the only one, right? So everyone in that room was crying. And I remember being there, like, chest heaving, sobbing, sitting next to this woman that I didn't know who was also crying. Like, the way people cry during Muharram is different, right? So I was just in that moment, and I remember thinking to myself, like, she and I are so different on any other day, but tonight we're both here, and tonight we're the same, right? We are connected in our grief together. And that was the moment where I realized that one thing that had stopped me from like converting to Islam was this idea that there was this line of like, Islam is for Muslims, and Muslims are only Arab, are only this, are only this, that, right? And so being able to realize like, no, like, this is also for me, I think was definitely like a eye-opening moment or heart-opening moment. Truly. Yeah.
Nice. And How did you, I guess, come to the Sabah community and stuff? How did you come to this area and stuff? Yeah.
Yeah, so like I said, I'm born and raised in the Bay. So I was living in Arizona when I took my Shahada, and then I went to New Jersey when I went to law school. And then the pandemic hits and everyone moves back home, right? So I moved back home. And I mean, Sabah is the center to go to in the Bay. So yeah, I started coming. And I'll be honest, like at first it was very awkward, very isolating. I think because Sabah is so big, right? So it's easy to get lost in the crowd. But it's so cute how it happened. I went to like one of the Q&A sessions, and I didn't realize this, but two brothers that had attended the center that I like went to when I first converted in Arizona have now moved out to the Bay, and like they live out here with their wives and all that fun stuff. And so one of them took a picture of me and then sent it to my best friend Anusha, who they knew because that's, she also grew up in that center and stuff like that. And I think the message to her was like, hey, not to be weird, but like, isn't this your friend? And it was like, I was the friend. And so they found me, they introduced me to their wives introduced me to their friends, and like, specifically my friend Alia, who like goes to Sabah too, she introduced me to like Sister Fifi, who like manages a volunteer like group. And so yeah, I basically got like, I'm not gonna say hooked in because that's like a little too aggressive, but I was embraced into the fold. And so now I'm able to come out like most Thursdays, and I'm able to volunteer, and like people are recognizing me now, and it's just really nice. So that's how I've like integrated into the Sabah community beyond just coming to Sabah.
Right on. Very cool. So a little bit on your career, Okay. So you talked about your family law, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know a lot about law too much, but in family law, I assume you're working with families who, for example, are having issues or something like that. Yeah. So does ever the aspect of Islam or religion, for example, break up those families? For example, families that don't have a religion, do you see more common aspects of those, or do families with religions also have problems as well? Could you touch on that?
I don't know if I can say this, but I think the common denominator in most of the couples that are breaking up is that one of the partners works at Apple, actually. Yeah, so beware. I haven't seen, so the firm that I work for is, like I'm the only Muslim there, right? And I've only just started, I'm like 3 months now with this like new firm. And so we don't necessarily have like a clientele base that is like Muslims. So I don't know, I couldn't tell you whether or not religion plays a part into this or not. I can only tell you that, people come to us in some of the most challenging like parts of their lives, right? And I don't think anyone enjoys the process of getting divorced. And I think it's heartbreaking for everyone, no matter like what denomination they're coming from. I do wish to like my Muslim people out there that they think about getting a prenup a little bit more, because a prenup is a agreement that you make before you get married, right? And we think of prenups as in like only the uber wealthy get them and stuff like that, but really the prenup is just a way to contractually validate your Islamic rights within the American legal system, right? So that's, if folks getting married want to be able to say like, no, when we, for women, for example, my money is my money and your money is my money, right? So that would be a matter of saying my money during the marriage is separate property, but your money during the marriage is community property. And that's an agreement that can be reached through a prenup. And all the prenup really does is like affect what happens when and if you separate. And to that I say, if you don't trust the government, at the end of the day, if you don't trust the government to decide what happens to your belongings when you die, why should you trust the government to make decisions about what happens to your belongings when you get divorced? So, yeah. And I will say the two things I learned in law school was to get a prenup and to get a will. That's my free legal advice, and that's the only advice I'm giving.
Nice. So was there any advice that you were given at like a younger age, maybe before you converted to Islam, or from your friend and stuff that really affected you and you want to share today? I don't know that there was any time that like someone sat me down, right, and said, like, you need to keep this in mind, kid, right? But
I think there were many, like I said, there were like many of these little moments. And what defined those little moments for me, looking back or even just, you know, in the moment, I think some of these moments I was very aware that they were life-changing moments, no matter how small they were, was the quiet certainty that accompanied these moments, right? So all throughout my childhood, I was like, I want to be a marine biologist. I want to be a marine biologist. I get to high school and my art teacher tells me that I'm very diplomatic. And there's just like this moment, this like aha moment that I was like, I am very diplomatic, right? And that moment changed what I studied in undergrad. And when I was in undergrad, right, I was planning on doing Teach for America. And I was like early accepted into that program. So by the end of my junior year, I knew I was doing Teach for America. And then in the last semester of undergrad, I just had one night where I just realized, like, is this what I want to do? Like, why am I doing this? And I had that one quiet moment of certainty. I was like, this isn't what I want to do. And what I want to do is something more than that. And that's the moment I decided to go to law school, right? Similarly, like when I was sitting across the table from my friend and she was like, this is the first time you said when you will convert. And I had just had that moment of quiet certainty, like, you know? So it was these moments where just because something changes your life doesn't mean that it has to come as a result of like incredibly extraneous circumstances or at the end of like a long internal conflict or battle or you're striving against certain situations. Like, it is these quiet moments of certainty that have the longest impact in your life if you can listen to them.
Wow.
Some really good points.
It's really inspiring. I like that. So real quick, if there was any piece of advice from this podcast that someone listening would take away, what would it be?
Something that I did hear when I was younger was that, you know, life is a process of learning and unlearning, right? And so being able to embrace that, of understanding that there are certain things that you've just carried in your life, that you reach a point that you have to unlearn those things. And what you do when you unlearn them is you realize that they've been holding you back. Not that they've been preventing you from functioning as, like, you know, an adult or as a student or as a employee, but that they keep you from existing at the fullest capacity of yourself, right? And by challenging those ideas or just coming to question them, you're able to be more than what you thought you could be, right? So I would say that process of learning and unlearning. And yeah, I think we'll leave it at that.
Make sure to check out our upcoming episodes on all the major platforms: YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music.
This was the Journey Towers podcast, brought to you by your hosts, I'm Hadi and Alyo Mathkur, and we'll see you in the next one.
Take care.
Everybody's got an opinion. Who cares and so what? Why? Because we have our Imam. We have the best of opinions. We have Quran. Yani. Like what? I feel that Islam should be like this. Like, who cares about how you feel? Somebody else feels that way. We're like, oh, I'm not religious, but I'm very spiritual. And I was like, what is that? Like, do you get high? Is that something like, is this high? You're like, oh man, I'm very spiritual.